What's up, YouTube? Alien Scientist here. I'm back with Ken Griggs, and we're going to do another weekly video talking about some technologies and some other stuff. Last week's video, or the last video we did, was on Bob Lazar, and I've gone back and updated a lot of the stuff on my website about him, and we're still talking about him and going over a lot of the comments and arguments that people have raised in favor and against him, and sort of going over all that debate. And of course, element 115, me and Ken here, we still are waiting to see evidence that would show us a stable isotope, and especially one that would have these remarkable properties that Bob Lazar describes. There's nothing in nuclear physics theory or anything else that I'm aware of that's has ever predicted a anti-gravity property from this stuff, although there is some other warp drive physics that me and Ken have talked about too. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today and really get into anti-gravity and the whole technologies and stuff. I don't know if you know this, Ken, but Tom Delong, he's the guy from Blink-182 that quit music, put behind himself pretty much a $1 million music career to get into UFOs and trying to get these technologies. He started basically this agency, it's called, I guess, To the Stars, TTS,
Okay.
Academy of Arts and Science, and of which he is the president and interim CEO. And he's got three synergistic divisions, which are science, aerospace, and entertainment, which that third one kind of intrigues me a little bit. With most of most of ufology seems to be entertainment at this point, at least most of the popular channels that are out there. So I would like to see more of the first two and less of the third, but I look forward to some of the live streams that he's going to be putting together, and I was kind of at least a little bit reassured or impressed that one of the main guys he has on his team is Hal Puthoff, who I'm sure that you've heard of. Hal.
Nope, I'm not familiar with him.
You're not familiar with Hal Puthoff. Well, Hal Puthoff has basically
That's the name. Yeah.
He's been writing papers and a lot of stuff for about 50 years. In fact,
Okay.
one of the cases that I cracked on Alien Scientist a while back, that's also in my debunk bin alongside Bob Lazar, was a guy named Stan Romanek, who said that he had channeled or gotten these equations from aliens about how to get how to do warp drive physics and how to
Right.
so I got those equations, and I'll show them to you here.
Okay.
So here are Stan Romanek's equations, and people were like, "Oh, well, what are these equations for, and what do they mean?" And of course, they're in the mirror. You have to put them in a mirror and reverse them all to make them look right, because the integral sign's backwards. Everything's backwards. But anyways, I was
He prides himself as being another
contactee. This guy's like a
yeah,
contact. This guy, Romanek, he says he was a contactee. That he actually filmed this alien poking the head in the window. It's really kind of silly, and his reaction is just like freakishly hilarious. It's like you can picture this guy with his like friend or something outside the window, like poking the fake alien head up. Let's see, there it is. He's like, "Oh no,
God.
they're looking in my window." Anyways, yeah. So this guy was a contactee, and he says that the aliens contacted him on many different occasions. That there he goes, jumping to the window.
Oh no. Okay. That's pretty hysterical. Okay.
Yeah, so this video is pretty funny, but the funnier part is he was selling copies of this back in the day on the internet. It was like $30 a piece, and you could go watch the video, and it was like a lot of people are actually paying money to watch it and see it, which is the sad part. But anyways, his equations, I eventually went and figured out where they were from, and they were from actually one of Hal Puthoff's papers.
Okay.
And I talk to you. I think I may have talked to you about this paper, but it's worth mentioning. It's an interesting paper, and it basically just talks about how the speed of light is determined by the permeability and permittivity of free space, epsilon
Yes.
naught and mu naught. One of the
Yep.
square root of those two gives you the speed of light, and how that if you were to basically find a way to change the permittivity and the permeability of free space around you, that you could essentially travel faster than the speed of light, because you changed what the speed of light would be, because the speed of light's a function of those two other more fundamental constants.
Mm-hmm. No,
Right?
that is absolutely correct. Yes.
Yeah. So
I mean, that's how we govern, with Maxwell's equations. Exactly.
Right. So this guy's a high-level theoretical physics guy, and he's worked with a lot of black programs in the past. So he's got like a history, and there's certain things he can talk about and certain things he can't. And I would say he's a pretty straightforward guy, and he wants to get some information out there. And I thought it was intriguing that in this article that was put out recently, he had talked about, one of the things he talks about is cutting edge technology. Here it is. Explain that these days, here's the quote, "These days science fact is outstripping science fiction. We scientists are beginning to take seriously such ideas as warp drive spaceflight right out of Star Trek, the high probability of extraterrestrial intelligence, and the realization that most of us of what will constitute the science of the future." So a lot of stuff about warp drive, I think, is about to come out, and me and you have been discussing warp drive in a lot of detail in the past few weeks since we've got back in touch. And I would kind of want to, well, let's let you talk a little bit and tell us about the Alcubierre Warp Drive. And
okay, so the fundamentally the key problem that physics has is, what is gravity, right? I mean, honestly speaking, that's what you're trying to undo. So if you don't actually have an understanding of what gravity is, then how are you going to build a device that's going to counteract it in a way in which gravity is really the effect that you're counteracting? It'd be no different than going back to Benjamin Franklin's day and having him build a television set. It's going to be a little hard because he doesn't really understand chemistry. He may understand a little bit about electricity. So that's the variation on why we go to Alcubierre. Because what Alcubierre is indicating to us is that from our general understanding of what gravity is as a distortion of space-time, the Alcubierre Warp Drive is the long-sought method for finding a solution to Einstein's equations that will enable you to travel faster than the speed of light. Now, this particular solution is unbelievably novel, obviously. Effectively, what you're doing is you're causing space and time to create a bubble around your ship or around your spherical domain of space, and the bubble itself is riding space like a surfboard on a wave. And you're able to manipulate how you ride the rest of space-time outside of your warp bubble. So Alcubierre's technique is beautiful, elegant, novel, but it contains one major problem. The major problem with Alcubierre's warp drive, with which Alcubierre states it and everybody else from then on states, is that it requires something called negative energy. Now, the negative energy is what allows one to create this overall bubble that gets sustained around your spherical patch of space. Now, that negative energy, so that's the challenge, is there such a thing as negative energy? And the debate, I believe, is over, because we can experimentally demonstrate, for example, that the Casimir effect is an effect that uses negative energy. We can look at the solution to black hole radiation which requires the existence of negative energy. So well after Alcubierre produced this paper, we actually have demonstrated that negative energy can be had. The question is, if you can have it, can you use it? Can you use it in the way that's required for the Alcubierre warp drive? Now, that's one part of the question. The other major part of the question of Alcubierre and his ability to manipulate space and time so that you're a surfer riding on the wave of space-time, which then means you can travel faster than light. The other major problem is that the warp drive does not include quantum mechanics. So all of a sudden you have sort of a general, not sort of, but a completely general relativistic way of describing how to break the speed of light barrier, but you've not included any notion of quantum mechanics in this whole patch of math. That's an unbelievable challenge, because maybe the solution to the negative energy question is really on a quantum level, and in fact that's really where it is. So the whole solution that Stephen Hawking gives to black hole radiation, the whole solution of the Casimir effect, is really quantum mechanical. That's where your negative energy resides. So in order to actually do what Alcubierre is trying to do, he needs a better theory. His theory is able to give you, okay, we believe that general relativity can do this, but what it's not capable of doing is producing that particular mode of negative energy that's required to get it done. So that's where White, I believe his name is Sonny White, comes into play. So Sonny has developed a mechanism that he believes can create this kind of sustained surf. And the problem, however, is that Sonny's surf doesn't contain quantum mechanics either. So he does give us a novel way of still producing this effect in a general relativistic classical way. But again, the question is, how do you get space and time to produce this much lower energy, negative energy that he uses versus what someone would say the Alcubierre warp drive required, a galaxy's worth of negative energy.
It's interesting that a lot of these skunkworks guys are talking about this warp drive and these warp fields and these warp bubbles and this ways to create this Alcubierre drive. I had a guy contact me, one of my sources for information that sometimes I wonder if it is classified or not. One of the things he sent me was a thing called Dirac holes, which are, again, negative energy states. And he basically said that yeah, they cover the surface of the craft with this material, which is able to create these quantum states or negative energy states, these Dirac holes. And that this is how they are able to manipulate the craft. And so anyway, I was pretty amazed, but that again doesn't give us the insights to what this material is or how we build the surface of the craft. But
that's right.
And that's going to have to come with development in science and technology. I think that might have to do a lot with the metamaterials and the quasi-crystals, which, as I've long been talking about in my videos, that I believe that those are the surface coatings that that aliens would coat their craft with, because it would allow for it might allow for this type of thing. Not saying it will, but this might be the key. Or at least some type of nanotechnology that interacts with light and light fields, because it seems to be very related to the electromagnetic spectrum, gravity anyways.
Let me try to put it in this context. I think that the UFOs or the aliens or skunkworks has come up with a slightly more sophisticated version of what we're trying to do here, and sophisticated in the sense that they've been, revising it and evolving it maybe for the course of 2 decades or 3 decades. What we're trying to do on some level is simply come up with the actual first level demonstrable measurement that this effect is there. And in that regard, metamaterials are not necessary. That we can demonstrate that with Phoenix, that the understanding of where you can get this negative energy stuff, these Dirac holes, where that resides, what are we talking about? How do you manipulate this stuff in order to achieve the Alcubierre warp metric in particular, or the Alcubierre warp field, or the Alcubierre warp sphere? But the bottom line is that in that diagram that you're showing right there, the beauty about the Alcubierre Warp Drive is that you get to determine what region, what spherical region of space gets cut off from the rest of space. And in cutting that region of space off, you get to decide how big it is. That's the whole point. And on top of it, you get to decide how quickly that bubble is moving through this ocean of space that you and I seem to live in.
Including faster than light.
Oh, yeah,
just
that's really the
blink
whole point.
from one place to another.
That's right. So what the Alcubierre Warp Drive represents is the most simplistic way of showing you how general relativity gives you a spherical warp bubble, and how that shape, the actual geometry of that sphere, which is not perfectly spherical, but how that geometry enables you to travel some distance, little r, instantaneously, effectively. How to make that one jump. And in that one jump, from here to Alpha Centauri, you literally traverse what we would consider normal space without space having occurred to you inside of the bubble. And that's why it's a warp drive. So the question that Sonny White tried to really approach this with is, well, maybe we can't make long jumps. Maybe we can't get from here to Alpha Centauri in one jump. Maybe we can make small jumps. And how do we achieve some functional ability to make these small jumps? And again, negative energy is required, and he hasn't resolved that issue.
We're going to start a company and build a spaceship right away and jump to Alpha Centauri. We need to take baby steps with this technology first, and at least show that there's an effect measurable, and that we can do it on a small scale and measure something new in the laboratory. And then
that's exactly right. But in order to do that, you have to have something like Phoenix, or Phoenix itself.
That's your intellect. This is, again, your intellectual property that you've been developing, your own theory.
Right. And what's really at stake here, what the ability to talk about entanglement is really the critical understanding that's missing in why you can't have, and why we don't as of yet have a quantum gravity, right? So you're going to have many physicists out at Stanford and other physicists across America and the world who are beginning to come to the understanding that space can be described through entanglement, and that gravity can be described through what, again, we're calling quantum entanglement. That's
right.
one of the
I almost picture like this surface, this bubble around the craft that you're creating being a shield, which, again, like just like invisibility cloaking works with a metamaterial, that you bend the light around yourself to make yourself invisible. If you were able to basically bend all frequencies of light around yourself, you would, for all intents and purposes, like no longer exist in the universe. You would disentangle from the known universe.
Now,
I think that, how gravity would affect you at that point, it would be very interesting to
what we call that phasing. So you get to phase from sort of the ocean of reality of space and time that you see around you into a phased version of it, which basically means you've got a warp field around you.
Right.
Now, in a phased state, you get to determine, phasing is no different than saying, on my radio, I'm tuning out of a specific frequency into, sort of the background white noise. That's what we mean by phasing.
Wow.
And phase back into reality, which basically means you get to tune back in to the reality that we all live in. But in a phased state, I won't be able to see you, meaning if you're phased. You get to walk through walls, you get to literally walk through matter, you get to walk through the earth if that's what you want. But the second that you rephase, there's a good Star Trek episode about this, the second that you rephase, you'd better be somewhere where you're not in the middle of some material. So that whole notion of
Right, so you don't end up like the sailors on the Philadelphia experiment with the USS Eldridge. Right.
what was going on the Eldridge.
I don't
What
know
was
what
going
was
on. Well, I mean, what we're saying, what Phoenix is saying is that, you know, whatever type of propulsion system they were attempting to employ, the consequence has been the development of some sort of warp field. And that warp field, because it was not big enough, shall we say, for the ship itself, so parts of the ship were inside of what we call the skin of the warp field. And inside of that thickness, the warp, so when you think about the sphere that we're talking about that surrounds the bubble that surrounds your space, the bubble has a thickness to it. And that thickness is not a region you want to be in while the warp field is up and running. You do not want to be in that part of it. So my belief, at least, is that the Eldridge, that parts of the ship were actually in that thickest or that thickness part of the bubble. It wasn't directly at the center where it should have been. The warp field wasn't large enough, or whatever field they had generated, we would call it warp, but it wasn't large enough for what they were trying to do. And although the whole ship itself got to, you know, disappear and reappear somewhere else, other people got caught in that thickness of the skin. And so they got to rematerialize inside of actual other things that were rematerializing, namely the wall or the hull or whatever.
There's got to be something going on with this. And you know what?
Well, what we're able to demonstrate is that the technology is not terribly difficult. It's just not. The problem is what, you know, you were describing them as the Dirac holes. That's actually your issue. Now, we're not going to, you know, just put that out there as to what we know them to be, but you're going to have to figure out what that substance is. If you talk to an ordinary physicist, they should know right offhand what that stuff is. But nevertheless, we believe Phoenix requires that's a key ingredient in making this effect happen at all. And so, you know, when one's asking the question about using mercury, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, there's a whole other aspect to the use of mercury to create, you know, the Nazi bell and, you know, thus to create some sort of a warp drive system. And so, you know, in there, you're going to have to know something very specific about mercury that we know. That's the beauty of it. And we can demonstrate that, yes, you can use mercury in order to create this effect, but you're going to have to know what you're doing. Okay?
Right, so without giving out too much away of what we've been discussing and working on, let's just come up with the idea that you know, there are people out there, some of them do have laboratories and are working on interesting stuff out there. And what if we were to maybe make a plea or an open call to try to see who we can get together, who's serious about this, to either bring us into their laboratory or help us put together funding and a startup to get our own laboratory going. It would be great if you know, we could reach out to these guys over with Hal Puthoff and Tom DeLong, who are starting up their very similar venture. They have very similar goals as far as the first two things on that list, the science and aerospace part. Aerospace, I think that's a typo. But yeah, I think what would you sort of put out there, and what would you say if we could reach out to these people and sort of get them on our side? And what do you want to do? What are your ideas?
Okay, so the first thing that I want want them to understand is that, you know, you're not going to go anywhere without some sort of a theoretical understanding of what's going on. You're not going to invent a silicon wafer unless you know something about molecules and chemistry. Period. That's it. So don't expect Benjamin Franklin to come up with a computer, even though, you know, he's a smart guy. He has no theory behind him. In other words, where a lot of these people, where everybody else is lacking, where they're all pissing in the wind, for lack of a better way of saying it, is that they're lacking a theoretical foundation to whatever experiments they're performing. So what we have is that missing understanding. That's what Phoenix represents. It's an understanding that not only tells you what the heck gravity is in a quantum language, but then also tells you simultaneously where particles, what particles, how particles, the whole dynamics of particle behavior. And we get to employ that in this methodology for producing phased reality or warp. So the challenge, or the challenge that we have is to, so we've got at least 10 inventions to put out there. But the challenge is A, to find the funding, and B, to demonstrate with that funding that, that, for example, silicon can be made to levitate. That's an easy challenge for us to resolve. But unless you have a theoretical understanding about how do you phase space, how do you phase that material, you're never going to get it to levitate. Okay, and we do have that. So what we want to be able to do is to actually demonstrate that. And by virtue of that, then we can take all of the next steps for all of the other inventions that are out there. For example, a new battery system, a new energy source, et cetera, et cetera. My main thing, of course, is warp drive itself. But along with this understanding of warp, you can also create wormholes. Or a better way of talking about the wormholes is really a Stargate. Okay, it's not, kind of put this. It's not
like Stargate,
really
that movie. We were going to go out and find pyramids on some other world.
Oh man, it's true.
No, I'm just kidding. Anyways, yeah, I think one of the first experiments that we want to do is with silicates and using a certain type of a certain way to basically levitate rocks. And if you can levitate rocks and come up with a new method for levitating rocks or showing how you can do that, that might explain how the pyramids were built. Just saying. So this is really big and real serious here, guys, and we want to get in touch with whoever's out there that can get us a laboratory to do the experiments based on Ken's theory, and I will be the guy. I'm the laboratory mule. I'm literally, I build anything and put anything together. So that's my skills, including this video, which, sorry, it's the productions. Again, I am working on production here, people. That's not why you come to my channel. You come for the information, not the production. If you want really good production, not so good information, there's a lot of other channels I can recommend. So stay tuned and catch you on the next video.